Joe? Okay. Hi, everybody. Okay, thank you so much. This is Jen Shonger. I'm from the New Jersey Autism Center of Excellence, the NJACE, which is funded in part by the New Jersey Governor's Council and the New Jersey Department of Health. Just so everyone knows, I'm a little under the weather today, so I'm going to be keeping my camera off. And I actually want to thank the neurodivergent community for normalizing that, because I actually felt brave enough to do that. So thank you. So I'm really happy to be here today with Dr. Serena Wieder and Carrie Alvarado. We are live on YouTube. Of course, we always love hearing about you, so please feel free to let us know who you are and where you're from in the chat. And now I'm going to go to our introductions. Dr. Carrie Alvarado, OTR, is the Chief Operating Officer and Clinical Lead for Autism Community Network, a nonprofit diagnostic and peri-diagnostic support center for families in San Antonio, Texas. Dr. Alvarado is the creator and director of the Earliest Connections Clinic, a diagnostic program geared toward identification and intervention for high-risk infants and toddlers. She leads DIR Floor Time and PACT, which is Pediatric Autism Communication Therapy, Teletherapy, and Therapy programs, intensive interventions supporting families impacted by autism through dyadic coaching. Dr. Alvarado's primary research interests include sensory affective integration, reflective video feedback, and parent-mediated interventions. And then we have Dr. Serena Wieder, the clinical director and founding member of the Perfectum Foundation, dedicated to advancing the development and mental health of children, adolescents, and adults with autism and other special needs through training and education programs. The Perfectum Academy's stellar faculty offers in-depth interdisciplinary training to provide the expertise needed by therapists and educators to meet the increasing needs related to autism spectrum disorders. As a clinical psychologist, Dr. Wieder has pioneered important approaches to diagnosing and treating developmental disorders. She co-created the Developmental Individual Difference Relationship-Based Model, otherwise known as DIR, with the late Stanley Greenspan, a parent-mediated and lifespan model integrating development, neuroscience, and intervention. DIR certificate programs have national and international dissemination in Israel, Argentina, Brazil, and Singapore, and of course here in the US. Now I would love to hand it over to both of you, and everyone who's watching. They do have an upcoming conference, which we will post information about in the chat, but they will tell you about that as well. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Jen. We're honored.
Thank you, Jen. Always honored and always happy that NJACE is around and supporting so many people and families. And I might mention our work at Perfectum also pertains a lot to parents.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we really are excited about telling you about not our conference, but actually this presentation is one part of the conference. And you can get more information if you look at the website, www.perfectum.org. And let's go. Do you want to move the slide, or who I'm not sure who moves them. Okay, this is it. If you take a picture, you can actually go directly to the website. It's called Supporting Relational Synchrony. And this is really about the dance of relationships. The R of DIR is for relationships. And we just know how important relationships are the heart of learning, of relating, of life, period. And we are at a very new point in our development of understanding development. And this conference will really bring in some very cutting edge presentations. We'll have NJS's Elizabeth Torres telling us how neuroscience can translate, how relationships and intentionality are actually felt inside the body and emotions. And the focus of this whole conference is going to be about the body, brain, and emotional connectivity. Mona Delahooke, who just came out with her new book about body-brain parenting, is going to talk about the body-brain feedback loops. She will be translating what we have learned from neuroscience that supports our focus on the dynamics of relationships and development, and it's very exciting. Gil Foley and I will be talking about the diverse developmental pathways to developing a sense of self and identify the hurdles that we know many of the children and families we work with face. I think what's really important about this is, and this is where we actually did pick up on Elizabeth Torres's work on how do you know it's you? How do you know it's you inside? You know, how do I know it's me walking, talking, laughing? And we will be really focusing on separation, individuation, and the developmental process of developing self and agency. Ira Globinski will be bringing us back to a challenge that really no one has quite figured out, and that is the onset of bipolar disorder. All the fluctuations that occur. He will tell us about the history, but most importantly, he's going to talk about parenting a child with bipolar disorder through life. What is it like for a parent? What is it like for a child living their life with this underlying force, this bipolar force, which is about emotional and sensory regulation as well. On our second day, we're going to have a very exciting presentation of two in-depth children, both neurodivergent, both struggling with arousal and reactivity, and actually show you the intervention that took place, as well as how we got that inside look and how we use biosensors to understand, whether what goes on inside is what we see outside. And it isn't always the same. And we will have one of the parents talking about her experience as a parent mediator of the intervention as well. So that's with Connie Lillis and Talbas. So I hope you join us. There's still time to register this week. And we will today really focus on the whole notion of self and agency for the most part. Okay, well, perfecta means progress. All of us who are interested in development and concerned about how supporting development are always working towards progress. And Perfectum is a think tank of innovations there. We started by creating the developmental individual difference in relationship-based model, and that was over 3 decades ago when I worked with Stanley Greenspan. And we were working with on an NIMH research project. And while we thought we were dealing with preventive intervention and supporting parenting, we did discover the neurodivergence that exists in the real world. And this is where we turned our attention to this area, to autism, to sensory processing disorder, to ADHD, and all the variations we know that individual differences bring into a child's life and therefore a family's life. And we're very honored at our conference to have Elizabeth Torres as our keynote speaker, because she is really leading the way into the future for all of us in terms of understanding what goes on the inside and how can we use that information to really target our interventions even more specifically, more precisely, to get the best outcomes we can. Well, the DIR model, it's important to understand, it was a synthesis, an integration of what many people have explored and examined before, we did or along with us. And this beehive, as Carrie calls it, really just shows how many people have been pursuing the understanding of development, coming up with theories, coming up with different intervention programs, going into the community, dealing with the impact of the environment, even of wars, of very much what we know is going on right now in our time. And this does have an impact on children. It has an impact on families. And we have learned a lot about the range of responses. And the question always is, no one size fits all in intervention. The question is always, how do we understand any individual profile? And how do we then pursue our support to that child and to their family? So these names will be very familiar to you. We don't have time to go into them, but they really are the shoulders we stand on. And we're very pleased that we came up with a first integrated model that puts all of this together.
Beautiful, Serena. I was just going to introduce this slide with saying, and these are the giant shoulders that we stand upon that have led us to this appreciation of the units of the family system and of the dyad, and of what we should really expect when we're looking at a dyadic developmental process, both in a neurotypical child, but also when we're looking at children who may be experiencing neurodivergence in the way that their brains are coming online. So in typical development, because of all of the work that's been done before us, we really understand that there should be this beautiful interactional cueing that's going back and forth between the infant and the child, the infant and the parent, very, very early on in the developmental trajectory. This picture is borrowed from the work of Colwyn Trevarthen, one of my favorites, but it really demonstrates so beautifully all of that back and forth signaling. Sometimes we refer to it as being like a tennis match, where there's cueing, that's facial expression that's being mirrored and mimicked back. There's gestural imitation and mirroring that's happening between the parent and the child. And this just kind of evolves seamlessly as those brains interconnect with one another. The caregiver really functions as a mirror for the child, and that feedback, that constant feedback loop that the parent is providing to the child, not only offers them an ability to achieve co-regulation, but it also helps to inform that infant of themselves, as a communicative agent, as someone who has an impact on the world around them. And so this is really the development and the beginnings of what we term synchrony, is this beautiful bidirectional relational rhythm that happens between the caregiver and the infant. And it builds, as I said, that sense of agency and that eventual sense of self-actualization for the child. But what we see when there is a developmental difference that is occurring within the child is that it can really cut off or hinder that dyadic rhythmical interaction between parent and child. And so in the case of autism, which is a pretty significant form of neurodivergence, it can, to varying degrees, really block the child's ability to use those portals of social learning and portals of social connection with their caregiver very early on. When I look at my mommy and it's a painful stimulus, when I hear mom's voice and I turn away because it's overwhelming to my nervous system rather than attuning to me, it can cause a real rupture, and it can cause a real disruption in the synchrony between those early bidirectional exchanges. And to varying degrees, it can close the portal of social learning for the child very early on. And it can also really hinder the child's ability to access co-regulation. All of those early nonverbal ways that we support a child feeling regulated can really be disrupted when that sense of making eye contact, attuning to the parent's voice, is not a soothing and regulative experience for the child. So in these circumstances, the caregiver, who should be functioning as a mirror for the child, is and really helping them, gradually develop this sense of self and agency that we were talking about before, well, that caregiver is left in a state of psychological catastrophe. And those are the words of Ed Tronick. And so there are repercussions that this kind of interaction and this desire for this parent to be supporting this child in this way, when that is ruptured or when it's more difficult, it can cause a lot of repercussions in the parent and the parent's sense of agency. And certainly it's causing a disruption in the child's development of a sense of agency as well. And it can undermine the child's access to co-regulation, and it can really hinder the child's development of agency and eventual self-actualization.
For sure, parenting is never automatic. And, thank you for describing some of the challenges we know exist because of this uneven processing and taking in the world and taking in the parent, and the reverse. So let me tell you a little bit about DIR and how we got to where we are. And one of the things we discovered, we took on this 6-year an IMH study where we had this golden opportunity to actually get to know infants before they were born, because to enter this study, mothers had to be pregnant and they had to have had another child before that. And what we discovered was that we had one big elephant. What was happening is, yes, what was development? It was just made up of silos. Okay, let's look at the motor. Let's look at the physical. Let's look at the movement. Let's look at the communication or the sound. Let's look at the environment. And all these silos were never coming together, because the fact is we're only dealing with one child. And the child and the parent embrace all of these components. We don't pay attention to one part of what we do and not another part of do. Our thinking, our feelings all merge in any intentional behavior that we can express, and certainly how we learn and how we take the world in. So DIR is both a theory and a practice. We believe and understood for some time now that, for example, autism is a challenge with connectivity. So we came across the notion that affect really is what helps improve that connectivity. The way you talk, the way you look, the way you move. We all know that we read the real message through these gestures, through all our sensations. And that's far more important than what we say. And by using an affect-based approach in our interactions, we can see children comprehending more, responding more, reading those signals better, imitating or initiating, most importantly. That's the practice that we believe in. That we think, one, we had to figure out, what does development mean? It didn't mean all those silos. And we defined the capacities for development. And where does life begin in the real world? Our first, and I'll be showing you these shortly, but we have to have regulation. If you have a calm baby and a calm parent, then they can share attention. They can do that beautiful signaling that Carrie was just describing. And shared attention is the attention to the parent. We're not yet talking about toys. We're talking about reading each other's signals, embracing the emotion, beginning to feel that love and forming that attachment. And that goes to the next capacity. If this is what you experience, then how do you communicate? And that really is the beginning of the self. An infant, really shortly after birth, can beckon their parent to their call. They have a sense of ability, of competence. Now, that isn't on a conscious level. It's really on a survival level. But it is where we know that that's where everything's together. Whether it's noisy, whether it's quiet, whether the parent is available, whether they're not, and not just the parent, of course, and family. So that two-way street, and all of the capacities I'm mentioning are continuous capacities. It's not a ladder that you climb one after another. I mean, don't we all know attention and regulation is our lifelong challenge for everyone. Engagement, falling in love, having a relationship is a lifelong challenge for everyone and takes work. And it takes that kind of interaction and understanding of ourselves and others. Communication is the same. We know gestures are probably the most closest to really conveying how we feel. But of course, then we have language developing, we have concepts developing, and we move into a child who can now move and they can solve their own problems and they can go find the cookie or point to the cookie. They can let the parent know where they want to go. And it is that relationship, that interaction, that is the driving force in development. Certainly as we move on and we play, and we can play in so many different ways, but essentially play as a symbolic force for cognition, for thinking, for problem solving. But every child is unique, and it's by understanding their individual profile that we can form our own conceptualization of what intervention should look like. And we offer parent-mediated interventions. Parents are in our sessions. In most cases, it's a little different when they're in school. And we have to make the arrangements for working parents. But there's one thing we are very sure of. It's that interaction day in and day out that is the moving force in development. And we feel the child is with a parent most of the time. And we actually promote. And by having parents with us in our sessions, they come to understand the child and they come to understand themselves and what really facilitates that child's development. So when we talk about development, we have to look underneath the surface. We have to look under that iceberg and see what's going on inside. And that is a lot of what we will be addressing, because now we have ways of examining and measuring that. The most crucial role of promoting the child's sense of self and agency is through this emotional apprenticeship. And that's a new concept for me, Carrie, and it has always been our aim. Would you like to expand on what you mean by apprenticeship?
So we really look at supporting child development through that relational interaction with the parent, right? So they are formed into an emotional apprenticeship. Well, one is really supporting the other and acquiring and understanding the emotional world around them and their own emotional experiences. I just think it's a beautiful way of explaining what that journey can look like.
It is. And I guess we're all apprenticeships of life per se all along, but it does imply, to me, it implies how much you have to practice. And that is an essential feature of all intervention, but it's especially important in using this model because interaction is available all the time. Okay, so a relational approach, really maximizes the use of a relationship. And we know this supports regulation, it reduces stress. And neurodiverse individuals share the same experiences and are taking the world in around them, which is not so different as anyone else. And we really focus a great deal on being able to promote that sense of self and acceptance and actualization. But it has to come through experience, and the experience is the interaction. We can develop skills, we can develop all kinds of checklists, we can count words, but what we really want is that conversation, that two-way conversation between a child, their parent, their caregivers, their teachers, the others in their lives, because that is the experience of relating. And very much focus on what things mean to the child, what they mean to the parent. And by understanding that, then that wonderful back and forth of what we call opening and closing circles of communication begins to build and expand and expand. So in DIR, we actually create those opportunities for every child to make that first move. Because if they show us what they're interested in, if they show us what's really meaningful to them, we don't have to work so hard. We have to join them. And we don't really think content is important. What's really important is that connection, that connectivity, where a child feels we are, but not only accepting what they're interested in and interested in them, but that we can share it with them. And this is where we come to the joint attention, where we can both parent and child, caregiver and child, can pursue the child's interests. And the other thing we understand about these early stages of development is that there is a lot of flexibility. This is when the nervous system is most able to change, most able to grow, and is growing at rates that are hardly imaginable compared to later in life.
So DIR is very unique in its interest and really what lies beneath the surface of the water, what's lying beneath the surface of that iceberg, right? I think it's a very unique approach in that it's interested in looking at the individual differences of the child. And when we talk about the individual differences, we're talking about the variations in the way the child might be experiencing sensation, different modalities of sensation, the way the child might be experiencing their own bodies, their own movements, getting feedback from their own movements, their ability to sequence their own movements and be intentional and take initiative with their own movements. It can vary so much from child to child. And I feel that this framework really captures the essence of how important it is to tailor the interventions that we're using in response to those differences. The other piece about this approach is that it's not only looking for vulnerabilities in child development, it's looking for those strength areas, right? Is this child really great at understanding static visual information? Is this child wonderful at catching language that's delivered to them in the form of rhythmical music? Do they love that inflection, that intonation, the rhythmicity, the pattern? Is that more acceptable to them? So we find inroads to connect with every child through understanding their individual processing systems. This really helps the children that we work with and the families that we work with feel safe in relationship, which is the core of what we're really trying to do. We want to promote the child feeling safe in relationship so that they're incentivized to continue to want to connect with us and show us more about what they know and what their curiosities are. And we want to help that parent and child really develop the ability to experience relational synchrony on a more frequent basis for longer periods of time and with a lot more flexibility over time and practice. So we really, when we're working with the child and family, we're looking not only at the child's processing profile, but we're looking at our own and how we enmesh as the clinician, but we also look at the caregiver's processing profile and we say, okay, are there matches here? Are there things that we could tweak a little bit, support a little bit more, or really use as an instrument of connecting these parents, this parent and this child together? Are there differences in the different sensory modalities? And like I said, are there differences in the way the parent or the child is experiencing their own bodies? And how is this impacting the child's ability to explore? How is it impacting the child's ability to engage in self-care tasks? How is it developing, how it is supporting or undermining the child's ability to engage in reciprocal interactions with the parent? And so we really do take into consideration these individual differences that lay beneath the surface of the water.
So here we have just a schematic drawing of what Carrie was just explaining. And the individual differences and the relationship and the developmental structure, the developmental processes are always interacting with each other all the time. When we did a 200-case survey of the children we were working with, this was many years ago, we discovered how important it was to create a profile about a child, not just talk about a diagnosis or the results of a test or another kind of assessment, but to create a profile for each child when we meet them. And of course, this is an evolving profile because that's what development is about. There's change occurring all the time. So we try to describe where they are in relationship to their development. And again, here it's the functional emotional development. This model is very much focused on emotions and the supportive emotions, which lead into a life, with strengths and good mental health. And you can see down here the list of different capacities I was describing before, beginning with the regulation and shared attention, the quality of engagement Carrie was just describing, the communication, And then, really taking charge. You be the problem solver. You have to figure it out. This actually brings us to a very important issue. Now, one of the things in DIR is we really try to help a child be the initiator. We believe every child has intentionality. Of course, there's variation in how well they can express it. We stay away from prompting. We support, we do semi-structured activities. We can enjoy the same, songs and games and activities, all children enjoy. But it's very important for us to really have the child be the one who starts, be the one who leads, who tells us what really matters to them. And there we build the foundation. DIR is a foundational approach because we want to set that stage up for future life. We don't know what life will play out on that stage. We do know that foundations are critical. And these capacities are really important in a lifelong kind of way. That's why we see DIR as a lifespan. And if you think about challenges you may be familiar with, you will notice they're going to relate to one of these capacities. If you think about how well children are doing, it's going to relate to one of these or more of these capacities. So this structure, this developmental structure is key. However, we have to tailor what we do to those individual differences. And we know we're not good at everything. And it's those differences we see in each other all the time that are understandable by seeing what we bring into the world. And what are the strengths? Some of us may be athletes and some of us are going to be couch potatoes and some of us are going to prefer the arts and being creative and others are going to prefer, the structure of becoming an architect or, a doctor, but it's never one or another. We have to really, develop on all these fronts. But of course, it's crucial to define our strengths because that's how we set up the base for our own futures. All of this comes through the vehicle of relationships, if I can call it that, because it's those interactions. When we say relationships, it isn't, oh, I love you. It's interacting and using that love, using that passion and compassion to support a child experiencing life more joyfully, to support a child's persistence and the hard work many have to do, and to convey that through our affect. We talk affect all the time, but it is the relationship that activates development. So think of this profile, because this is the integration we really introduced to the concept of development. And DIR is a very dynamic system and changes in many different ways as it proceeds. So where do we come from? When I mentioned the history, we did come from an emotional approach, a mental health approach. We focused on attachment and relationships. That's the critical piece of this model. And together, we attain that synchrony that we just heard described. And the stronger the synchrony, the higher the child climbs that ladder in early life. The other thing is that same interaction has to do with reciprocity. When I say two-way street, there are lots of different ways to think of what goes on during that process. So it is reciprocity that is a critical factor. We know this from research, but we also know it from your own lives. Aren't we all looking for reciprocity, feeling understood, feeling accepted? Aren't we all kind of wary and know whether someone likes us or not, or approves of us or not? This goes on all the time. And, even by 18 months of age, we know that this kind of conversation really will let us know and support how regulated, how attached, what communication is going to look like. And if it isn't what we're hoping for, we just keep doing more. We don't skip these capacities. If we meet a child at an older age, we still assess for that basic profile, because sometimes you have to go back to get that shared attention. Sometimes we have to go back to make sure that our relationship embraces all emotions, not just the good ones. There's a bad guy out there, and there are bad feelings out there, and there's competition, and there's power struggles, and there's judgment, and there's morality. So when we talk about relationships, we are talking about the full range of emotions that we see as part of this relationship. And if we don't see that, we go back down again. If someone doesn't play, we play some more. It's never something that's just hierarchical. These are ongoing, continuous images. As you can see, we're always knitting the fabric of relationships and how we learn through them. So conversational supports are really important. We know children who have 1,000 words but can't have that conversation. And these are really the prototypes for what we're going to need later in life to communicate in any number of ways. It might be through language, it might be through art, it might be through music, it might be through construction. Every child has to find their path. Each of us have found our own paths. And this is where that foundation is started.
Yeah, and I think it's so key that you're mentioning that this early synchronous back and forth bidirectional signaling that we saw in the Trevarthen picture earlier, we could still be building the understanding of what that kind of relationship and that dynamic feels like to a much older child who hasn't yet acquired that ability to stay in that rhythmical interaction without being overwhelmed by it. Mm-hmm. Right. And so sometimes we have to really go back in and lay that groundwork of this is what it feels like to be in relationship, and it feels good. And I want to do more of this, and I feel seen, and I feel understood, and I feel valued. And I just think it's so important that we understand that sometimes we do have to go back in and reintroduce some things that we might have expected a child to experience much earlier on than they've been able to, because of their individual differences.
But we have to remember, life is just not fun. So what happens if you're angry? What happens if you're scared? What happens if you're getting bullied? What happens if you're disappointed? What happens if you're hurt? And this is why we often do have to go back. But the basis of a relationship is that joyful pleasure, is that beautiful synchrony. And we really go down the ladder as much as we go up the ladder, depending on the situation at hand. Mm-hmm. And that is a very important point. You mean you're just going to play? Yes, we're just going to play. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole other topic, of course. But we do ask everyone to think about how they played and what's playful. And we also believe development does not have a timetable. It's dynamic. We can go up and down. There are second chances.
Thank goodness.
In many ways, as you all know, right? And it is that understanding of development that is so central to this process.
Right. So yeah, we really do start in DIR. We very much start at the base of the ladder. And that really is focusing a lot on the child's feeling in the just right arousal state where they can take in the sights and the sounds and not become overwhelmed by it. We're really focused a lot on development of emotional regulation so that there's a firm, stable platform and foundation to build on for the child. And this can include, impulse control, the ability to then share attention because I feel safe, I feel regulated. It helps children navigate feelings of anxiety, and it helps them develop more ability to stay in relationship for longer and longer periods of time, like we explained before. We also, through our work in DIR, try to really nurture an inner world and a symbolic world for children. And I think, Serena, you actually should have taken this item because this is your cup of tea. But we certainly—
Yes, I must admit, it's one of my favorites.
Yes, we'll take it. Take this item, please.
Well, look, we have to live in a symbolic world. It's always been the case. It might have been through drawings, and it might have been through, music. It might have been through drama. It might have been in many, many different forms. Not every child is going to play with a lot of different figures. Others are going to like dress up. But symbolism is what goes on inside of us. And we need a symbolic approach to thinking, to relating, to learning. And we move into symbolic play very, very early in the game because, one, it's fun. Children do love to play. We can build on that natural interest in whatever form it takes. And that symbolic development is what we're going to depend on for the rest of our lives, because it's how we communicate, it's how we understand others, it's how we can play safely, to really experiment and discover who you are. And if you're going to be the bad guy, what does that mean? Well, maybe it just means the bad guy won't get you. But it really does help us develop the empathy and the morality that we need to bring to life and the world around us.
Beautifully.
And we have, by the way, on the Perfectum website, there are many, many programs that address all of these issues that you can learn more about, as well as at our conference. So do check that out, as well as our parent toolbox, which give dozens of videos that explain each of these capacities. That's free, and you can watch and see different examples of what the goal of the interaction is.
Wonderful, wonderful resource. The other component of DIR that I love is that it is a parent-mediated intervention, right? And so as we were sharing earlier, to varying degrees, parents are really needed to be part of the session. They're a crucial part of the session. They're the experts in the child, right? And so we do really try to support the parent in better understanding their child's signaling. Some of these children's signals can be very nuanced and can be missed, especially when you have a caregiver who's feeling anxious and overwhelmed by the situation. And so we really do try to help the parents, in addition to the child, feel safe and feel seen when they're in a relationship with us as the clinician. We want to empower parents to better understand the child's individual profile. Know, oh, this is why my child is good at this. Oh, this is why my child is moving away from me in this circumstance, right? It's not me, it's not personal, it's their neurophysiological profile working against this. And we really want them to become better at being able to read the child's cues and respond to the child's cues in the moment. When that interactive opportunity rears its head during bath time or meal time or time at the park, we want them to know, this is what I can do to support my child's development moving forward. I can do this. Not only the expert clinicians, me, little old me, the parent. It's just such a beautiful gift to be able to give to families. And it's a gift for us clinicians working with the families because, as I said, the parent understands the context that the child might be bringing forward, right? A child might have one utterance throughout an entire session, and the parent, if they're there, they can tell you, oh, that's their show they were watching this morning, or that's what happened with us at dinner last night. And they can bring that context so that you can have that response that's contingent and is in alignment with what the child's intent is. That kind of opportunity presenting itself over and over is what helps to develop agency in children and in their parents as well.
I just want to stress that this is also the foundation for social capacities and social interests. And oh, that's a perfect picture, Carrie. Thank you. Because here we see two children running with a parent, but they also want to run with their peers. And it's what we learn through our interaction very early in life that sets the stage for the social life of the child, and which we hope will be interactive. How do you make a friend? How do you have social entry? What happens if you're at the edge of the playground or the schoolyard? So we're very attuned to how this carries over to the social life of the child. As you all know, we talk about social emotional. I like to think of it as emotional social, because it's having that inner core, that inner sense of safety and security and self-awareness that will guide a child into knowing where to connect and how to connect. That's very crucial, and we know one of the most concerning questions we hear from parents.
I love that. I'm stealing that. Emotional social development. I love it.
And that's right. And that comes through, the practice comes through symbolic play. In the beginning, children just imitate what they experience in real life. they're cooks and, doctors and, drivers and so on. And then they move into the more abstract play and they use those stories and those shows that they watch, because literacy is a big part of our model as well. And, again, move into their own ideas, their own imagination. And with it comes anxiety. And that is one of the things people understand: developmental anxiety. And we understand the anxiety that comes from individual differences, which can be getting in the way. And we know how to treat, we know how to help. So that's, really very important. Always come back to that child's profile when you worry about something, because you will find the answers there. And always think about that profile when you're celebrating that child and how you can take the joy in their development.
Absolutely. So as Serena highlighted earlier, and as we've talked about throughout this, our primary mechanism for change in a floor time intervention is following the child's lead. And that means following the child's interests, the motivations, and that child's budding, sometimes very budding intent. What are they just demonstrating? Just a little minor moment of interest in. That's where we will meet them. And that's where we will start to build our relationship with them. And this isn't based on what we think works. This is based on what we know works, right? Increasing.
Right.
Increasing.
Thank you for bringing that.
Yes. Lots of different interventions are starting to incorporate following the child's lead, because it works, because science has shown us, research project after research project has demonstrated that this is the way that we have an inroad with these children. We know that the longest play interactions with caregivers and their children occur when the child's play ideation is followed, when the parent imitates them, matches their interests, or maybe just slightly expands on and adds a new element to the play of the child. That child stays engaged for longer and the reciprocity is better. Empirical research also consistently shows that high levels of responsivity and synchrony from the caregivers, made possible via following the child's lead, really renders increases in pro-social child behaviors such as language development, emotional regulation, and cognition. And when caregivers become directive, or when interventionists become directive, unfortunately, that renders slower development and asocial child behaviors, which is not what we want to see more of. So there's consensus growing across many interventions. Following the child's lead and gradually expanding from their interests is really a catalyst for instigating change that is generalized and sustained over time, because it's coming from an internal place of the child's motivation. It's internally mediated. It's not externally prompted by the environment around them. It's much more spontaneous than change that is attained by intervention that's adult driven or overtly taught to the child. When caregivers follow the child's lead and they're synchronous and they're responsive in that, the child will demonstrate increased levels of joint attention, which we know is how children learn from the social world around them. And it has shown enhanced language gains for many children who become verbal. By following the children's lead, caregivers decrease the cognitive load on the child. It decreases the amount of attentional effort they have to give toward a given activity. They're already motivated by it. They've already got the motor plan to do that. They already have maybe some symbolic ideation bubbling to the forefront for them. They're not having to redirect and take on someone else's idea of what's important or meaningful and try to develop a new motor scheme and a new sense of attention and motivation for something that's novel to them, right? It also has been shown to decrease the children's feelings of anxiety when we follow their lead. And also it decreases the motor planning demands, as I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. And we all know we always have, experience with children we don't quite get. And this is another way to think about how do we get to that inner story. And we depend on observations, whether the child's behavior, whether it's the way they play, whether the way they interact with others. And what we are now learning is that we can get an inside story too. We can understand that child's inner experience. So it isn't just the theme that tells us what he's worried about. Let's say just a simple example of the good guy and the bad guy. And how do I stay safe, or how do I empower? I mean, we know how long children hold on to these powerful symbols until they feel more powerful themselves. And that is a developmental process, because as they get older, they begin to understand they don't control the world and others will be controlling them. And DIR creates that space for them, to create that self, to really develop the agency and, you know, the competence, but also the confidence they're going to need in life.
Yes, because where is that rigidity coming from? It's coming from a lack of a sense of control and autonomy, right? And so when we can go in and insert a child's ability to experience that, it's like a little Tin Man, you know, and we go in and we put a little oil here and a little oil there, and before you know it, you've got a child who can be really flexible in the moment and more attuned and reading and responding to cues in a much more speedy way, so that they can feel and experience a sense of agency more robustly than they could before.
I do want to just really highlight one issue. We do know that many children script. In other words, they borrow these capacities. You know, they know the right answer. They know the answer that you expect to hear. And the scripted sense of self is not uncommon. And what underlies that often is just poor comprehension. And we have to be very, very careful about the comprehension, because all our children are bright. Really, just about all our children are really quite intelligent. But actually, it's part of that intelligence that they can script. It's not a bad thing. It's a clue to us that we have to step back and look at what their real understanding is, and not only think it's the right answer. So what we do is we agree and we disagree. We don't say it's right or wrong. And we try to get the child to think for themselves, because they have to figure out why we agree or why we disagree. They have to try to put together that integration they're going to need to stand up in life. And that's something to always look for. Do we have not just language comprehension, but the emotional comprehension, you know, as well as the ideation that we need? And this is what we focus on during our early years of intervention, but it's a lifelong process. It's never too late to go back and to develop these capacities. And that's what development really means. There is no end to development, as we all know, as we look at all of life and what we have to transition to and cope with.
Yes, thank goodness there's no end to development.
So this is our perspective. To develop a sense of self comes through that relationship and what we convey to a child and what he internalizes from his own actions, from his own ideas and thoughts and feelings. And that's interacting completely and build a sense of agency. It doesn't come all at once. It's a progression throughout life. I'm not sure what time it is.
We're at 12:54.
Okay, so we have a few more things we want to share with you during this time, and appreciate your attention. Go for it, Carrie.
So in floor time, we really do create a sense of agency and a sense of self. Creating a sense of self creates the sense of agency, but we do this through co-creation via interaction with ourselves and the child and the parent. It could be just interaction between the parent and the child, and we're coaching from more of a distance, or even through reflective video feedback. But we are always helping to support the child's ideas lead, to help the child really voice their own interests in whatever way that they're able. And we wait for that initiative from the child, and then we join and respect that child's ability to sustain or take a break and then return to us, and to develop a better general understanding and appreciation for how it feels to be in relationship with another person.
So we're all aiming for agency. I'm not sure we ever have a sense of overall control, but that's the fluctuation in life. And if you have a sense of agency, you can go with the flow. You can manage with what comes your way, because you can think things through, you can understand them, and you have enough self-awareness to adapt and to adjust and to get help when you need that help. And it's the sense of agency that's really a source of emotional mental health. It's a source of being flexible and being able to make change. It's the source of dealing with conflict and challenges. It's what we all hope for and work on the rest of our lives.
So this is really leading us up to our growing edge and what we're excited to talk about a little bit quickly toward the end of this conversation. We are always evolving in our approach. We're always integrating what we're learning from research and what we're learning from the real experts and working with a neurodiverse population, which is the neurodiverse population themselves. So we are excited to really talk about, in the conference that's coming up, but a little bit today too, about the translational neuroscience that we are calling is guiding the movement. And also that, in addition to the neurodiversity movement, what we've learned from the individuals who shared their stories and who have communicated their life experiences and their needs to us more and more clearly over time. Their voices have really become a guide to us. So it's helping us shift from what we see on the surface to what, again, may lie beneath the surface of the behaviors. So just to unpack the movement a little bit, it started with, well, it didn't start with Esther Thelen, but she was one of the pioneers of this movement, definitely. She was a pioneer behind the dynamic systems theory, which really revolutionized how we thought about motor learning. She was one of the first people to say movement behavior is a result of interactions with the environment, both physical and relational, and it's ongoing. Like Serena said before, development should be very flexible and should have no endpoint. Esther Thelen, in a personal communication with someone, I wish it had been me, but back many years ago, she was one of the first people who was looking at movement and really looking at children impacted by autism or autistic children and saying, how do you talk about reciprocity or lack thereof as a psychological phenomenon if the child has motor problems, right? And so she was one of the first researchers really thinking about what is beneath this behavior. You know, it's not a lack of wanting reciprocity. There might be some individual difference here at play.
And we might add that she was actually a close colleague of Elizabeth Torres, who really has carried on this path where movement and motor control is actually the baseline for all intentionality and agency.
Yes, and so another pioneer in the field that I think led Torres to where she is today, thank goodness, is Anne Donnellan. You know, she had a phenomenal paper that came out in 2012 called Rethinking Autism Implications of Sensory and Movement Differences for Understanding and Support. And this was a paper in which she integrated these beautiful examples and quotes from autistics themselves, really helping the scientific community become more aware and attuned to their actual lived experiences. There are sensory and motor differences that we're experiencing that are underlying some of these social interactional components that you're measuring, right? And so she really helped she challenged the traditional medical model. And she said, no, I really feel via these reports from the autists themselves that there are pervasive sensory and motor differences that they're experiencing that are undermining their ability to socially relate, their ability to socially communicate and to engage in reciprocal flow, all of those things that the DSM criteria is outlining identify autism. And then that leads us to the work of Elizabeth Torres, who again will be our keynote speaker for our upcoming conference. This is a brilliant mind. She's one of the researchers that I'm the most excited when she comes out with a new paper. And she really says that we're born with the capacity for social readiness, and our perceptual systems help us make sense of the world, right? And so when there's something that's disrupting our ability, something that she terms can sometimes be a corrupted sensory motor feedback system, right? That can really underlie a challenge that the child might have in engaging in synchronous patterns of interaction and sociomotor entrainment, or ability to kind of physically imitate and mirror back and reflect the emotion, the motor components, the motor things that they're observing or interacting with around with their parents. So she is talking a lot these days and publishing research left and right about the biosensor revolution, the need for us to really have an inside view of the nervous system and the body rhythms that help harness the potential of children. She talks a lot about needing a personalized approach based on precision medicine that targets interventions for autism and other neurodevelopmental differences. So you can see why Liz is a favorite of ours, because we've really been so motivated and captivated by individual differences since our formative years, right, Serena?
For sure. I'll never forget when we first met and she said, well, what is this child with special needs about? And, you know, we've been at her doorstep all along the way. And if you're not familiar with this book, it is an amazing collection of articles that really help you understand and deepen the plot, deepen the dive, as they say these days, to understanding not just autism, but really just our humanity. So, do pursue it, and I hope you come to hear her at our conference. It will, by the way, be recorded, and you will be able to access it if the days don't work for you.
But as we mentioned before, our work is increasingly always evolving. We are always looking for what's the new research, what's the innovative technique, approach that's coming out and showing, demonstrating efficacy for this population. But we really are also always wanting to be responsive and sensitive to the neurodiverse population themselves. We thought it was really interesting to read that the neurodiversity movement was not founded that long ago. It was founded by an Australian sociologist named Judy Singer only in 1998. And she really shared a lot about her youth and her difficulties in making eye contact and being bullied because of those differences. And she was kind of the first person in her thesis, a chapter of her thesis that was called, I thought it was a great chapter title, "Why Can't You Be Normal for Once in Your Life?" Which was published in the UK, I believe in 1998 as well, or 1999. So she was the first person who really recognized there are different kinds of minds, just like there are other, other areas of the population, other minority groups in the population that need a movement because they are oppressed and they do not have the resources they need. She was the first person to assert that the neurologically diverse need a movement of their own. And so she coined the term the neurodiversity movement, which I think is an amazing story and an amazing contribution from her. So this is a quote from Julia Bascom, who is an autist herself and who was one of the founding members of ASAN, the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. I follow her work. I followed her work for years. I'm such a fan. I love to step into what it must be like to be in her body. So she shared this quote, and I thought it was really appropriate for our conversation today. "I have autism. That means my brain and my body have a hard time talking to each other. I move funny, and I can't always control it. And maybe most importantly, I can't always start moving when I want to. Sometimes my skin can feel things, sometimes it can't. A lot of the time, I can't figure out how to move. Sometimes I know in advance when I'm going to have a bad body day, but usually I don't until I've dropped something all over the floor. Here's the thing about me and hugs. Here's the thing about me and touch. Here's the thing about me and my eyes, me and my hands, me and my disability, me and my body. Here's the thing about me. It's a weird conversation, but I wouldn't trade it for the years when I didn't know how to have it. There were whole years when doctors and parents knew that I couldn't see, that my leg muscles were knotted and my torso was gloppy and my body didn't listen to my brain. But no one told me, so I thought I was bad. My body didn't work, I thought. I didn't work. But that wasn't true. It's just no one had taught me how my body worked, let alone how to talk about it. You shouldn't be a stranger from your body, and I'm not anymore, and I don't want you to be either." Just a beautiful, beautiful way of describing her experience, and a beautiful kind of call to action for those of us who are in the field who really do want to understand what it's like to live in bodies that don't communicate accurately, and to help these children and their parents understand and appreciate their strengths, but also be able to communicate those areas that are challenging for them in a helpful way.
Well, I don't think anyone can say it better. And I'm really happy you found that, quote to share with everyone, because it really attunes us to what does go on in neurodivergence. And it's something we've known about for very long, but now it's really getting to be much more understood. And we have the tools to measure some of these differences. And I'm excited to learn more from Liz Torres about that.
Absolutely.
So our quest to learn and evolve, remember, development is about evolution, and to certainly become allies to neurodiverse children and their families. DIR has always been, and we include either children, parents, people in panels or individually to help us better understand their experience and share the experience of others. Our conferences highlight autistic voices and experiences from experts as well. Please join us. We have certificate training programs to learn this method, to learn this model. It's interdisciplinary. Just as we try to bring together the components of DIR, we brought together really all the disciplines, This includes OTs, speech, educators, doctors, neurologists, and all the mental health professionals, because we know we'll build a better world when we all work together. And there are also many other opportunities through master classes, through special programs, as you heard a lot about, through our conferences coming up this week, for both educators. Parents are welcome at everything we do. And we really want to thank all the parents that have helped us learn so much about their children. And now our children have grown up. We've grown up with them as well, and how much they help us learn. So this is the dance that we're on, and we hope you join us. Thank you so much. Let me just highlight some of the new things. Mona Delahook, another plenary speaker, is going to really be talking about a real life way of understanding brain and body connections and how that can help us understand children and how to manage behavior, but not in a controlling way, not in a behavioral way, but in a joyful way through the relationship, through those connections. Our other speakers have also published just this year. Gil Foley is a co-author with another occupational therapist who's really going to talk about the implications for mental health. Connie Lillis is coming out with a new manual about her way of integrating the different aspects of neurofunctioning. And she will be one of the presenters in the case studies. And you will find her work really an amazing way to organize all these ideas together with Tal Baz, who is one of the most exquisite interventionists, who will demonstrate how parent mediation works, how you work with a parent. The children they're talking about both have arousal issues, and we have understood it's not what it looks like, no matter what you see. I have a chapter in the most recent textbook on autism, which talks about this model as well. And Ira Glovinsky has, written several smaller books on the whole issue of mood disorders and some of the current thinking about how we look at mood and fluctuation of moods. I hope I got everyone. So thank you so much. I don't know if we have time for questions, but we're happy to take some if we can, Jen.
Yes, we can. There's actually 2 so far, and if anyone else has one, please let us know. So someone had a question about in regards to mirroring, and I love so much how you both talked about listening to autistic adults and neurodivergent adults, and how important that is in everything that we do with children, because we're trying to learn from the experience of others and respecting their ways of experiencing the world. And I think that the relationship-based model that you all exude so beautifully really ties into that. So the question was, so for mirroring, they were asking about the difference between how autistic connection might look to neurotypical connection and exchanges. And they were wondering about, how do you judge how connected the child feels? And is there a measure for that? And they were also wondering about eye contact, if that's still something that, maybe it won't be comfortable for that child or that person, is that still something that should be worked on, or?
Right. Well, those are really important questions. Let me go in reverse and then you can pick up, Carrie. But, people have isolated the notion of eye contact from communication. we know many autistics and many other people, are not comfortable with direct eye contact. They tell us they can't think and listen at the same time, or they can't, figure out how they feel about something if they have to keep gazing at someone else at the same time. It doesn't mean they never have eye contact, but we want to work from the point of view of when a child feels they can look at you, wants to look at you, that's when it'll happen. Otherwise, we use every other channel to stay connected. And it does happen. We do know that because there are many reasons that have to do with those individual differences that can impact not only eye contact, but all other kinds of interact, gestures, movement, proximity, touch. All of these are part of connections. And it's never really been clear why eye contact has been given so much focus. Obviously, it's one of the first ways we relate. The gaze, the synchrony, a parent and child looking at each other, but it's not the only way. And the tone of voice, all the different expressions we use with our bodies and with our feelings are ways to connect. Do you want to take the mirroring?
Yes, and if I can just piggyback on the eye contact piece just a little bit, I think as well, in floor time, it's never really a goal. It's an invitation to reference me if you feel like it, buddy, if you feel connected to me. And what happens with the child is generally, as the child is experiencing relational success and that neurochemical profile is looking better, the oxytocin, the serotonin is moving in and helping to dampen down the reactivity of the child, it doesn't feel like a threat to make eye contact anymore. So even though we're not targeting it, the child will start to reference and start to maintain their gaze a little bit longer, which does give that child the window of opportunity to develop a more positive tag associated with looking at faces, but to also start to look at faces for a little bit longer so they start to understand and interpret maybe what a facial expression is telling them, what their own facial expression is telling them, right? About their own internal experience. So it's not a targeted intervention, but it can be kind of a very positive downstream effect of a child who's feeling safe in relationship, seen and connected with, and is wanting to check in then with their caregiver and not experiencing an aversive response to that. Over time, I think it really does help to diminish the impact. I mean, we all avert gaze, right? I go to the grocery store and I avert gaze with people I don't know, right? I think we all do that to a certain extent, but when we have relational trust with our interactive partners, and we can experience and understand facial expressions more richly because we've practiced it, because we're no longer averse to looking at faces, it can be really helpful for the child moving forward and understanding other people's emotions as well as their own.
And I might add, though, we want to support that possibility. And this is why we guide parents to position themselves in front of their children. Get down there, get down at their level. We call it floor time because that's where children mostly play. But we take on the responsibility of being within the range that will heighten the interest and the comfort, of being able to look at someone else and to maintain gaze. And we do find that improves. It does. But it should not be a marker of outcomes.
It should never be a demand.
Right. And we don't demand it. We don't prompt it because we don't think that really works.
It's not honoring the child's
not at all. Right.
Yeah,
right.
We're all about that.
And sometimes you have to just listen more.
Absolutely. Listen with your eyes and your ears, right?
Right. Let's go back to that. Right.
Yeah. So then the other question about mirroring, I think, is really interesting as well. I think when we first start intervening, especially with a child who doesn't have an awareness of themselves yet, the primary goal of following the child's lead and the primary most intentional kind of layer of following the child's lead is to engage in imitation or mimicry or mirroring of what the child's action is, because that gives that child that feedback of their own movements, right? If I raise my arms and someone raises their arms right across from me, or if I jump and you jump next to me, I just had a communicative bid. I just initiated an interaction, whether or not I meant to. I just had an impact on the world around me. And when a child experiences having an impact on the world around them and they get that feedback from mirroring. That helps the child, again, when it's following the child's lead and the child is the origin of the movement and they're being mirrored, that helps the child develop a larger sense of agency and sense of impact on the world around them, which is definitely what we need to build a child who understands how to be a communicative agent in the future. I hope that answers the question. Go ahead, Dr. Serena.
I know, I just want to add though, there are many just childlike activities that we know help the mimicry or the imitation give a child a sense of belonging. If everyone is playing, if you're happy and you know it, then you're all doing something together. It builds that connectivity. If we want a child to build, more body awareness, we do sing, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and get things all jumbled up. But we do it through this kind of interactive process and children interacting with each other. So it's a very crucial part of learning, and all children learn this way, and we adapt, depending on the range of movement or the range of, comprehension. And as I said, the issue about mirroring has to do with, I mentioned before, about scripting. We just want to make sure that the comprehension and the emotion behind it is understood.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And I know you said earlier that you do have autistic adults who present at some of your conferences, and someone was asking a little bit about that. And so Inger had asked to follow up. How do you ensure goals aren't neuronormative, since autistic identity is so important to mental health?
Well, I think, as we mentioned, if you look at our conferences over the years, you will see that we have always included and wanted to understand and invite and feel that, autistics belong in our community and with us. It is a two-way street. We want to understand each other, but we don't have to be like each other. And isn't that what individuality is about? And we called it individual differences. Now we have other bio system ways of defining these, measuring these. But that's part of the difference and the dignity of difference. And we really believe in the dignity of differences and honor it and respect it and bring it into everything that we do. In this year's conference, we don't have an individual who is going to be speaking to this, but we do have parents who are and children who are, that you will be able to see in our videos, as well as, in the conversations that are part of this.
One of my most favorite Perfectum conferences, and I can't remember, it was a few years ago, it's all pandemic schmear now, right? But you had a presenter who presented the entire conversation on an AAC device, and I just thought that was phenomenal.
Yes.
I've never seen that at a conference before. It was all delivered via AAC, and I just thought it was just a beautiful way to put that at the forefront of everybody's imagination of what's possible, and for us to really hear and interpret and understand better on the experience of all different kinds of people.
And we've actually had parents and children, parents of autistics and their child meeting together at the table and talking about growing up together. You see ourselves as interveners growing with, our children, and they have grown up, and you're going to hear more and more about and see more and more of those who can express and talk for themselves, and they're always invited, to what we do, because we're part of this together.
Yeah. And I love so much how you focus so much on the importance of attachment, because I think especially when it comes to autism, and we had a previous guest, Oswin Latimer, who had a whole webinar about attachment, when it comes to autism, and how it really becomes degraded by a lot of the things that happen to young autistic children. And like you said, if there's already sort of, developmental differences that make, the traditional ways of being attached more difficult, then, if the parents are then being told to do things that further degrade that attachment, like you can see why this would lead to more distressed children and more distressed parents. And I think like the whole model and the fact that it really includes both the parent and the child, and that you realize that this is relational, and it's not just this one-sided thing where we're saying, okay, kid, you need to learn all of these skills and do all of these things. I think that's just so refreshing.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
No, thank you, Jen. And you could see that's such a theme that we always pursue of self and agency.
Yeah.
And, if a child is not given the chance to be themselves and to, really discover who they are and their intentionality and what matters, and then we're missing the boat.
Right.
Yeah.
And what you said about the protection of the parent sense of agency as well, right? And parenting a child who's developing differently and feeling competent in that role. Yeah, I mean, we could talk a whole nother hour about that. I'm not going to go there, but I do feel that there are, there are wedges that are driven in very early on from neurophysiological differences, and then the community, the traditional medical model, and so many types of different intervention that expect for the child to be disengaged from the parent for sustained periods of time over the week.
Right.
What does that do to the parental sense of agency? What does it do? Does it support the parent developing more skill with connecting and being responsive and supportive for the child and understanding their child, or does it atrophy those skills that might have just been blooming, right? It's really disheartening that is still a really prevalent model of intervention that we're seeing.
And it comes with a lot of anxiety. Some people think anxiety is just part of autism, but I think that's such an overgeneralization. We know that anxiety is part of life for sure, but it doesn't come with. It's something that where we support that sense of self and agency, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And, we solve that dialectical problem. And that is the course we follow. They're going to be these, conundrums of things that don't fit together. And we really work hard, with our families, with parents, and with the children we work with who grow up. So they're not just children anymore. They're adolescents, they're young adults. And we've learned a lot about, by having this long course, this developmental perspective, across different stages and transitions of life. We keep learning and keep thinking about, what else? It's, I always say, the magic words aren't, please and thank you alone. That's certainly socially, desired. But it's, what else do you want to think about? What else do you want to do? What else do you feel? It's always deepening that plot in order to make those things come together, to make those connections.
Yeah.
So we still have a lot to learn. We want to learn it with you.
Yeah. But I think, and that's key, because it's ever evolving, and our understanding is always growing. And so we need to be open to new understandings and, just being on a continual path of enriching what we already know. Okay, so we have two other questions. One is, I think, from a DIR practitioner, perhaps, or a family. Let me ask you this: which question would you rather answer first? There's one which could be more general about DIR and the availability for parents. So there's another that's more specific about DIR practices. Which
it doesn't matter, Jen. Just throw them at us.
Okay, so I'll
very related. So we'll do
okay.
Flexible. One or the other.
Okay. So Jennifer Abinat had asked, how do we get DIR to be better understood and become the recommended therapy when parents are seeking support for their child?
That's a great
That's a great
question. Well, one thing is to have the opportunity to talk on programs like this. So I do want to thank you, Jen, and Elizabeth Torres, who's the principal investigator of NJs, for giving us this opportunity. And, we have the big picture. We write the books, we do the presentations, we have the conference, but you're absolutely right. How do we get into the community, make parents aware of at least having a choice?
Yeah.
Having
the choice is really what, is key, because historically that hasn't really been the case. And I think the more people are learning about neurodivergence and development in general, people want to have more options that support their values and their understanding of their children.
Right, for sure. And we are making some headway. In fact, you're in New Jersey, and New Jersey is the first state to acknowledge DIR as an option for some of their community. It's still the Medicaid community, and we are finding insurance companies are now recognizing this as a form of intervention. So I think we are making some headway. But the reason Perfectum chose training, because we don't treat children directly, we don't offer services, we depend on our wonderful therapist programs such as, Carrie Creates and many, many others to be out there. And our goal is to really offer the training so we can disseminate, further and further into the community. We don't have enough DIR providers everywhere. They tend to consolidate in different areas geographically. But that is our mission of Perfectum, to provide these educational experiences, training experiences to all disciplines, because this is an integrated model, and to parents, and to autistics themselves. Everyone, is welcome. And I do hope, that we've inspired people to pursue this training and inspire parents to ask for it. Parents change the world of autism. If you go back historically, and if you read some of the books on neurodiversity or of a different kind, you will see that it was the parents' insistence led to special education laws. And I really think it's going to take our actually standing on the shoulders of parents to help them, move this forward by their saying that we know there has to be a choice, and we want to know what the outcomes are before we make our decisions. And it's not a question of how many hours, it's a question of how well we connect and learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think this will be the last question, which is from Marcel Horn-Mendiola. And they say, how do you address the functional emotional capacities from regulation to higher level during the interaction with the child in a day? Could vary from lower levels to higher levels in a play session.
It could vary. That's absolutely right. I mean, if we work kind of up the developmental ages, it's not going to happen all in one day, but it doesn't take long, because these are capacities that come in pretty quickly for many, more, slowly for others. But yes, this is why I like to think of it as Swiss cheese. We can see all these capacities. Children think, children have ideas. They don't always know how to put it all together. But we think of it as Swiss cheese. Where are the holes in the developmental course? And that's why we go up and down this ladder all the time, to strengthen the foundational skills, because we don't know what's coming. So it is possible to do this in one session, depending on the child and the parent, because it's understanding this model that's essential to parent mediation. And we do spend time reflecting on this. We ourselves as therapists spend time reflecting, and we call this, like reflecting supervision, that we want to think about what happened here today. And what did we get and what didn't we get? And we work with parents through the same exact process, reflecting, well, what did you learn today? What are you going to walk away with? What was missing? What question didn't we answer? This reflective process is central to this model. And it's very much what we train in, and it's not done quickly. To learn, it takes a few years of practice and supervision and, learning from all the sources we were sharing with you today. And this is what gives our, DIR therapist is very well trained. And if you talk to DIR families, you will hear a similar story of their development, of their evolution, of what they've come to understand, and what their goals are, realistic goals are.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. And I love that this is so much geared toward the child and what the child needs to be safe. And there's a Barry Prezant quote that I always loved, and it was, the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust.
Yes.
And that's, it's clear that that's at the heart of, everything that you've described today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
so he couldn't have said it better. Thank you for reminding me.
Yes, of course. And I think too, just going back to some of Dr. Torres's research, even her recent research has really shown this very important window of self-directed learning and, this need to not be prompted through things. And, she's talked a lot in the past about the element of almost surprise of when it comes to learning and neurodivergent nervous systems, especially that when something is prompted in you, your nervous system isn't going to learn it as well as if it's, self-discovered. So, as you've all explained, like the key here is agency. And I don't think the importance of that can be overstated. So absolutely must know information.
Sure. We don't teach development. We discover development. And that's what he's getting at.
Yeah.
Because development is a process of discovery.
That's beautiful. All right. Well, we put the link for the conference in the chat. So for anyone interested, it is there. Thank you both so much for this beautiful presentation and for sharing all of this with us. And thank you for being so kind with me.
Oh, thank you. No, really, thank you. You did really well. Thank you. And you see, we didn't have to see your eyes. We could hear your voice. We could hear you.
Yes.
We could hear your meanings. You communicated beautifully, Jen. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.